Welcome. Welcome to Healing Sexual Trauma Summit. I am Marcy Little, your host, and here with me today is Lavinia Plonka. Lavinia, welcome.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here, Marcy. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's wonderful to have you. I like to start each interview with just a moment to sort of get present and ground and tune in a little bit to what's going on with our bodies. So feel free, if you'd like, Lavinia and viewers, to close your eyes, or you can close them 3/4 of the way, whatever feels genuine and good to you right now. And see if you can feel the sensation of your body on whatever you're sitting on or lying on. And if your feet are on the floor, see if you can feel your feet touching the floor and the floor coming up to meet your feet. And just begin to notice what's happening in the breath. And by noticing, you may suddenly take a deeper breath, or you may want to exhale with an audible sound. It feels so good to do that. Feel free to open your eyes when you're ready. And I want to invite you as viewers to pay attention to your breath and what's going on in your body. And if, for example, something arises in our talk today that makes you feel uncomfortable, or you're suddenly feeling overwhelmed, or you feel a tightening and you're just like, wow, it'd be good for me to just take a pause here. Feel free to hit the pause button, take a break, do what you need to do to find relaxation again, and then join us. We'll be right here waiting for you. Okay, without further ado, I'm gonna talk a little bit about you, Lavinia, if you don't mind. Lavinia is a body language expert who has helped people improve their movement, behavior, relationships, and careers for over 35 years. Her unique expertise and careers, no, missed a line. Her unique expertise connects the dots among posture, movement, emotions, and the mind. Lavinia's training and professional career have included theater, dance, yoga, and the martial arts. She has taught the Feldenkrais Method for over 25 years and is also an assistant trainer. Lavinia is a level CL4 teacher of the Alba Method and an emotional body instructor. Her books have been translated into 7 languages, and she has created dozens of online courses and lessons. She's currently on the faculty of the Shift Network and owns Asheville Movement Center in Asheville, North Carolina. Lavinia, that is one legacy of really being there to help people feel better in their bodies and in their lives.
Well, thank you. You know, when you've lived a long time, Marcy, you get to do a lot.
Yep, I know. I hear you. Getting there myself. Anyway, is there anything else you would like our viewers to know about you, Lavinia?
Oh, man, I think that they're going to discover who I am as we talk. I don't think I need to add any more to that.
Okay, that sounds fine. All right, I like to begin with this first question of all my interviewers. I know you've been as a faculty member on Shift Network, and as somebody who does this kind of work, you're in high demand. I think you've probably been on many summits. So I'm wondering, what made you say yes to being a part of the Healing Sexual Trauma Summit?
There are a number of reasons that I could give you, besides the fact that I was really impressed with the way you asked. That's just the obvious. But through my years of working with people, I have often had the opportunity to learn from many survivors of sexual trauma and realize how important coming back in touch with my sensation of myself and reclaiming agency of owning my body and my choices. I just see how important it is. I grew up, I didn't suffer sexual trauma, but I suffered a lot of physical trauma. And I feel that in a lot of ways, some of the pain and holdings are similar in some ways, but there are differences. So I wanted to bring that out there to the world so that people can see that there are solutions that are simple and effective and safe in order to begin to move into a new aspect of your life. So that was the major reason that I said yes.
It's a great reason. I like how you said learn from.
Oh, but it's true.
Uh-huh.
It's true. I mean, I remember the very first time when I was a recent graduate. And, you know, when you're a recent graduate, first of all, you're already scared. You don't know what you're doing. And I was just kind of going along with some of the things I had learned in my training. And I asked this person to lie on their side. And then I sat behind that person. And her body just went into this place. And I was like, what's wrong? And this whole story came out about how, you know, if she laid on her side, she would lay on her side in a particular way to face the door because the abuser would come from the other side and come in behind her. So anytime anybody would come in behind her, she would go into her trauma response. This was something brand new to me. And the process of, you know, beginning to work with her and then learning how to address, first of all, how to give a person the space to feel free enough to share with me what has happened, and then find that safety. In many cases, that safety meant that there was no touching at all involved, that the movement came from their own choice in the beginning, and how to learn to feel safe being touched, which, by the way, was something I had to learn also because of, you know, getting beat up all the time. I had to learn to feel what it was like to actually be touched by someone in a safe way. So that's what I mean by learning from each person, how to create an environment of safety that also allows learning for both of us. Because to me, I learn from every single person I work with.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. Also your own personal story and the fact that, yeah, it was like you too had to learn what felt like a safe touch for your own body.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really amazing example that you started us with. And viewers, if that was, you know, that might have been like, wow, that sounds really familiar to me. Just take a moment to pause and check in. Yeah, because that's, a lot of us can really relate to what you just said, Lavinia. I work with people, for example, who need to sit way across the room. You've had that experience?
A couple of times I've begun there, but we get closer. Sometimes they can't even look at me. They have to be turned away as they're speaking or as they're trying things, so that it's as if they're in their private space. Yeah. So I also work with lots of pillows and bolsters and coverings so that people can kind of hide themselves and do what they need to do in there. You know? So that's another strategy that I would have never occurred to me. But gosh, I can see how good that must feel to just be completely covered in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, at certain times. And I imagine that every person who comes to you is different. And in a way, it's like the learning never really stops.
That's right. I mean, we're all so incredibly unique in so many different ways, you know, the way each person walks, the way each person stands, each one of us, we carry our entire life story in our carriage, in our attitude, even in the sound of our voices. The whole story comes out all the time.
This is sort of an aside question, but with that level of attunement to what people's bodies are communicating, is that something that that you can turn on and off, or is it something that's with you at all times?
I feel that when I work with people, I am making every effort to be present to everything that's taking place. So it's actually not so easy. It's not my second nature. And I don't walk around looking at other people and going, oh, he was this, he was that. Because the other thing is that I would never make a judgment based on how someone's walking or how they're standing about what their story is until I hear the story. Because there's so many reasons for why we choose to be the way we are. You know, one person can have rounded shoulders because of being abused, but another person could have rounded shoulders because their hip joints didn't develop properly as a child, and they developed a kind of sunken self-image. Now, chicken or egg, you know, both of them have a sunken self-image, but the cause of the story can be very, very different. And so I never sort of analyze too much. Sometimes, okay, sometimes. Sometimes I'll look at someone and say, gosh, I really would love to work with that person.
Right.
That's, you know, that's about as far as I would go.
Right. Like you can see, well, I can see that they're carrying pain in their body. And I know I can help them to.
Right. Right. Or I can
feel less
see that,
pain.
you know, he's heading for a knee replacement or something like that, you know, then I sometimes will say that, but, you know, I'm not going to try to analyze a story.
Great. So, speaking of pain, you know, the Buddha says life is suffering, but here we are working with people to try to help them to live with less suffering in their bodies. And you work with people and spend a lot of time, it sounds like to me, getting close to origins. Is that right? Can you talk about that?
Well, I was also thinking, I got thrown when you were talking about the Buddha, because I was thinking to myself, well, didn't the Buddha also say pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional?
I don't know.
I don't think he used the word optional, but there's, but it's the choice. Do I make a choice to suffer from my pain, or do I just acknowledge that it's there? So I'll say that. Origins.
Hang on. Let's stick with that for a second.
Okay.
Let's unpack that just a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. So pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. We have a choice whether or not we suffer. Can you say more about how it's a choice? What makes it a choice?
So maybe we have to go back one more step and define what we mean by suffering.
Okay.
Okay, because pain is real. There's no question about it. And pain can become something that is almost like a loop inside oneself, because the brain creates the pain, right? I mean, when you fall and hurt yourself, the pain is not necessarily coming from the knee. The injury is in the knee, but it's the brain that's telling you that something is wrong. So what happens when people have repeated pain experiences or a trauma that is so intense that the brain takes that on, you can create what they call a pain loop, where the pain is continuing even though the trauma or the injury is no longer there. My attitude towards that pain is what I call suffering or not suffering. My attitude of being afraid that I'm going to hurt myself more, feeling, you know, so attached to the pain that I can't think of anything else, feeling self-pity because I'm in pain. Those kinds of emotional and mental anguish are what I call suffering, which is different from the actual pain itself. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes.
And on that level, and you know, that's not to say that we all get into that. We all get into, you know, and I think that part of that is a self-soothing process, that the brain hears me acknowledging that there's something going on there. But the brain is so tricky. You know, the whole idea of neuroplasticity is that the brain is constantly changing, and it's not always changing for the better. It's changing based on the information that it's receiving. And then it decides that, okay, you are pain. There you go. You are pain. And then what do you do? So that's why I like to separate those two, because one of the first things that people want to find is, how can I become free from the misery that's attached to the sensation of pain? And I want to pack it a little bit more even, and talk about the difference between sensation and perception.
Yes.
Because me hitting my arm, I get a sensation. Something is hard, something bangs on my bone, but my perception, what I'm calling it, is pain. Somebody might go, oh, that feels good, right? Because they like that feeling of contact, right? Of feeling their bones in contact with something. But so what I call it is my perception. And that's important for us to also realize that I'm naming this, and by naming it, it becomes something in my mind and in my emotions.
As you said that, I flashed on my husband and I trying to do cooking in the kitchen. We have this small galley kitchen in our house, and that distinction in perception in terms of how that affects what is pain and what is suffering, what is sensation, and what is an unwanted, something unwanted. On a time when I'm feeling a certain kind of way, he'll brush by me, or he'll open the drawer and it'll hit me in the hip, and it's like, oh, no big deal, look at us, we're dancing in the kitchen, we're making a meal. But at another time it'll happen and I'll just feel like, ow, and why aren't you paying attention to the fact that I'm here? And it's really like something else is going on.
Exactly. That's a whole other story we can unpack, isn't it? Because it's the outer circumstances. I'm blaming the outer circumstances for my experience, where it's actually my inner experience of myself that's impacting on the outer circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're getting philosophical as well.
Are we? Well, but it has everything to do with perception, right? So I'm perceiving that as he's meaning to do me harm. Mm-hmm. But on another day, the same thing happens and it just doesn't even hit me that way. So yeah.
It's so true. It's based on kind of who's occupying this vessel right now. For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything more on that before we go back to origins?
We'll probably come back to it, but I can't think of anything.
Okay. Awesome. Origins of pain.
So it's interesting because with the Feldenkrais method, there's almost kind of like a paradox, because we tell people, it's not important for you to have to give me every detail of your story and and try to figure out whether this pain is the result of the fact that you fell down the stairs, or that your brother did this to you, or that all of that doesn't really change your experience in the moment, because we're working in the moment with the sensation and the perceptions in the moment. What is connected physically to, what can move, what can't move, what feels safe, what doesn't feel safe. How do I free this? At the same time, every single little detail that someone suddenly says becomes food for me to understand a little bit more. So often people will come to me and they'll have story A, I have a frozen shoulder. I don't know how it happened. I think I used my mouse too much. And then, I don't know, 20 minutes into the session, they'll be like, I forgot to tell you about that time that I was in a car accident about 13 years ago. And, the doctor was really mean to me, and, and it comes out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, this memory comes up out of people. And so then origin starts to happen. Mm-hmm. So that, somebody today started to tell me the story. We did a lesson just moving the legs and the hips. And she remembered that when she was a child, there was something wrong with her hips, and they put her in one of those braces with the casts, and she couldn't crawl. She had to drag her leg. She hadn't thought of that in, 40 years. And all of a sudden, this whole memory of being 2 years old and dragging her body around came up for her. Mm-hmm. So, I don't pry. I don't try to get all the answers, and I don't try to figure it out as I'm going along. But I listen and I'm open. And as we move and I encounter an obstacle to the movement, we both wait. We wait to see, will it let go? No, let's try another place. Let's explore someplace else. And then another piece of wisdom emerges from the person. until everything starts to reorganize. I don't know if that makes sense. As I'm talking, I'm going, am I making sense?
To me, it makes so much sense because this is very akin to how I work with people. And I agree with you. It's like we don't really need to get into the story. We're going to be right here in the moment. We're going to be with the body and what is present. The body's going to tell the story as we start to work in the body. You know, I love how you said, you know, we get to a place and oh, all of a sudden we've come to the edge of the range or there's a block. We're going to pause and let the body let us know, you know, what's here, what's here. And maybe it's ready to tell it. And maybe it's not ready to tell it. And then you move somewhere else. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful process. So yeah.
Right. We sometimes talk about our work as, you know, what would you call it? Somatic politeness, or, you know, I mean, we have lots of different terms for it, but this idea of being, of honoring, of respecting the nervous system that I'm working with, and allowing it to make the choices, make the decisions in order to be able to move forward. What happens a lot of times with people is that they feel that they have to push through, or they feel that they have to perform in a certain way. And what that does is it just brings their old habitual protective mechanisms out, so that sometimes a person looks really great, but they're holding all this other stuff inside. And the beauty of this work is that we have permission. Sometimes we call it the language of permission. I have permission to stop. I have permission to do it badly. I have permission to refuse. It's all up to me and allowing. So, you know,
that's like coming back to that ownership of your body.
Feldenkrais said he wanted to restore people to their human dignity.
Just gonna breathe on that one. Yeah, great. And when we have experienced sexual trauma or physical abuse or trauma, that's exactly what has been harmed, is our dignity.
Yeah, and I mean, I can speak to that experience very clearly. You know, I mean, I was once at a seminar, and I was fortunate to be partnered with someone very, very experienced, and all people were asked to do was to gently place their hand on the person's sacrum.
Ooh.
You know, because that's part of our work, right? And I mean, I've been doing the work for many years at this point, and this person just gently touched my sacrum, and I had such an incredible flash of when my father used to pull down my pants and spank me with the belt, and how I would just be completely cringing with shame. So I never understood cringing with shame before. It was so visceral, this feeling of everything just kind of squeezing together, and that flush of shame. Who knew that I'd been carrying that for my whole life? And all it needed was that gentle touch to bring it up in a safe environment. And so to feel, you know, how much shame that is unwarranted, that's not, that there's no reason for it, lives inside of us. And of course we know, I mean, Brene Brown has done tons of talk about that, but that visceral experience is what I really value about our work, is that I can have it, I can feel it, it can move through me. I understand something about how that has impacted on my posture for my whole life, you know, and I can let it go.
Yes. And then that brings up a question. So, and because you work with people's postures, it's like, by making a tiny alignment in posture, can someone suddenly become in touch then also with something that's just lived just below the level of consciousness, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I have been holding that this way in my body for 45 years or however long.
Absolutely.
Work in tandem, I think. Yeah.
And you can see their eyes, because they stand up and it's like, whoa, I haven't been here in a long time. It's really pretty amazing. And of course it doesn't always last, because it might feel safe in my studio, but if you've spent 40 years in a particular protective posture, you're not necessarily going to right away want to go out into the world and embrace it. But at least you touched the possibility, you know the potential, and you can work towards it in
Right.
order to begin to start to feel like you could take it into your life.
Right, right. It's the glimpse.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And so people work with you, they get this glimpse, maybe not quite ready, maybe don't have the tools yet. Maybe it doesn't feel safe yet. What do you recommend for that person after they leave if they don't quite feel safe yet to sort of maintain that opening?
Well, I always tell people that their nervous system is very intelligent and it knows what to do in order to keep you safe.
Mhm.
And when you are ready, you will make the choices to be something more, something else in some other way. I also encourage people to practice, to ground themselves with whatever somatic practice they choose, whether it's Feldenkrais or something else, to give themselves time to just lie down and recall and remember that sensation, to bring it back into the body while you're feeling safe at home alone. I mean, there's many strategies really that people can begin to employ in order to begin to, like with anything else, with repetition comes mastery. And so with repeating a feeling of, oh, like you said in the beginning, of just kind of coming in touch with my breathing, of just remembering that I have shoulders, of just sensing how I walk into a room and pausing. All of those strategies are, I mean, they're not very revolutionary really, but when I start to do them intentionally, I can begin to start to change where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and for a lot of people who live or are used to living kind of from the neck up, I mean, for someone like you who has a life of kind of practicing and being in the body, and me also through dance and yoga, it's like, oh, coming into my feet. It's so immediately accessible, but for someone else, that may not be immediately accessible.
Right.
Like the idea of, oh, sensing my body, like when I'm doing the dishes or when I'm opening the door to my bedroom or whatever. It's like, it can be quite novel, right?
Right. And I think it's important for people to hear that, I mean, a lot of times people will be like, oh, I sense my body. I know my body.
Mhm.
But to give people the opportunity to actually go deeper at whatever level they're at, to go deeper into a somatic experience of oneself, to be able to really connect my shape, my weight, my size, my breath, the breadth of my cells, whatever level I want to go to begin to understand that I am a sensory being. As you put it, I'm not just a head on top of a machine.
It gets me from point A to point B.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that, and of course, it's not possible to do it all the time, but one of the things that I do with people who have a tendency to dissociate themselves from their sensation is whenever they say, I was doing this with my body, or I want my body to XYZ. And I try to remind them that, when you say that, it's as if you're saying, I am separate from this thing I'm calling my body. It's like, you are your body. Feldenkrais was actually one of the first people to speak of the relationship between the brain and the nervous system and how it works. And he said that the mind and he said something to the effect of, there's no mind-body connection. The mind is the body and the body is the mind. So how do I bring it all into one piece?
Uh-huh. I actually wrote that down from the video that you have on your website. I was going to
Cool.
talk about it, and so you brought it right up. I love that.
Yeah.
The mind is the body, and the body is the mind.
Right. There's a tendency. Oh, and it does finish, by the way. He says, a brain without a body cannot think. That's the punchline to that quote.
And yet we have people who are paralyzed from the neck down.
But they still have a body.
Uh-huh.
They're
Right.
still breathing,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yes,
They're,
right.
you're right. They still have hormones flowing through them. They
Mm.
still have different things happening. Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Even, and it's even more essential for people who are paralyzed to remember that they are connected to that body.
Yes, that they, yes, yes. Okay. Yeah, I have a son actually who has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So he lives in a wheelchair
Mm-hmm.
and his body is very, very sensitive and
Right.
very, very attuned, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are some of our best teachers, because they show us, you know, what we're forgetting, what we don't value, and how they deal with it. Right.
Mhm. Yeah, truly.
Mm-hmm.
So you have talked about the nervous system and how the nervous system and the brain create loops a little bit. We kind of started with that. Is there anything more you want to say about that?
Well, we can interrupt the loop. I think that's important.
Yes.
I think that's really important. An example I like that it may sound a little corny is, you know, for years we were told to put ice on our injuries in order to reduce pain. And what recent research has shown is that the ice is not reducing the pain. It's confusing the nervous system,
Huh.
because the nervous system can only process certain amounts of information at the same time. So if it's getting pain and cold at the same time, it's going to go for the most immediate thing, which is, damn, this is cold.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing? So yeah,
Yes.
there's a whole lot of research now that you can look at where they're realizing that the healing is not coming from the ice, but it's interrupting the pain loop.
Got it.
So the pain loop, of course, is your brain having become habituated to the sensation that it's turned into a perception that just keeps on going.
Mhm.
So, you know, people with PTSD have this in spades, but some people just get into a pain habit. You know, you might hurt your knee, for example, and then you start nursing your knee, and then you start limping on the knee, and then you're afraid to step on the knee. And then, you know, and the whole time the brain is going, oh, it must be injured. We better be careful. And then it signals you, yes, you did. It hurt. I'm giving you a simple example, but that's an example of a self-created pain loop
Mhm.
where you didn't intend to do that. But in the process, the brain has decided that that knee is very fragile and anything you do is going to hurt it. And so therefore, anytime you interrupt it. Another pain loop is where a person has had repeated trauma, so that the nervous system is trying to protect you
Mhm.
from a trauma, so
Not
that
happening.
as you start to do something, it already gives you the pain just in case you're going to try to do something, you know? This, a lot of times when I've worked with athletes or dancers who just drove themselves to the point of like destroying parts of themselves, then they don't understand why they have chronic pain after they've had all the surgeries and they've had all the rehab. They don't understand why, well, I just did this one little thing and it hurt. And it's the nervous system going, I know you're going to swing from that trapeze again and try to do that flip.
Right. It's
You know?
nervous system saying, I remember.
So those are loops.
Uh-huh.
Those are loops that where the brain may be overreacting or protecting or just in a habit of telling you that that part hurts.
So how do you interrupt that loop?
So obviously you could use ice. No, but what I'm saying is, you know, so one very effective pain strategy is, of course, to distract yourself. And anyone who has had a sprained ankle, but then seen the person that they have a mad crush on coming towards them, suddenly doesn't feel the pain so much anymore, right? Because I've been redirected. So to redirect your attention is a way to interrupt an aspect of your pain loop. And that's very difficult to do unless something very exciting happens, like you win the lottery or something like that. So what I love about Feldenkrais lessons that we do is we acknowledge the fact that there's pain somewhere, But then we look at, well, where is there not pain? Or find an aspect of an activity, a safe activity that doesn't include challenging that piece of pain. So I come in with a frozen shoulder and I know I can't put my arm up above my head. And so I'll start with working with somebody's ankle. And I can't tell you how many times people go, I came in here with a frozen shoulder and why are you down there? But because you're a system, right? And everything is happening through the system, then when I'm working with that ankle, the system starts to relax. And as the system starts to relax, it starts to reorganize. And as it starts to reorganize, whatever it is that's kind of impinging there might find another way to be. So we've got redirecting the attention in whether by choice, redirecting the attention somatically to another part of the self, and then also exploring the idea of moving from the place of pain to the place of no pain and seeing the difference, and then playing with moving back and forth can be incredibly helpful. I mean, I do a lot of work with that. I'm not going to try to, we could take everybody through a meditation of that right now if you want, but I don't know if you have the time.
How long is the meditation?
It could be 3 or 4 minutes.
3 or 4 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that you have this gift, which is reconnect with pleasure.
Right.
Is that part of the gift?
Well, yes and no. I specifically chose something that I wanted to make sure was safe for everyone. And one of the best ways to work with your relationship to your discomfort is to connect it in some way with your breathing. Because when we're in pain, our breathing pattern is impacted. You can't help but breathe a little bit more shallowly or a little bit more rapidly when you're feeling that pain. It's just a natural response of the nervous system. So when you can find yourself in a relaxed state where you could actually begin to feel how you breathe, and then how that breath would allow you to actually be grounded through your skeleton. Because the other thing that happens is, even when people are lying down, sometimes the pain is so strong, it's almost as if they're resisting lying on the table. Right. They can't let go. Right. I can't release. So the lesson that I'm offering to people is, it's actually from one of my breathing, it's from my breathing program. Mm-hmm. And it's a exploration on how to find that spaciousness in the chest and the torso with the breath. And through that process, feeling how the skeleton itself can yield to gravity. Mm. And in that process, when I yield to gravity, a lot of times pain comes from the holding, protecting, and ironically, that creates oxygen deprivation in that area. And so then it creates more pain. Mm. So, and trying to force myself to take deep breaths doesn't help. It's about having a relaxed breath. It's about having an easy breath. It's about having a full breath without effort. And so the recording is an opportunity for people to be guided through something like that. So you're right. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's part of the process.
Love it. As you were talking before, we talked about this gift that people can all connect with so that they can reconnect with their pleasure. It was occurring to me, as you said, someone comes in with a frozen shoulder, you work on their ankle, you redirect their attention to a different part of the body that's not in pain. And so I'm also wondering, how important is it to redirect to pleasure?
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. So instead of focusing on my pain, I focus on what feels good. Yeah. I focus on where things are okay. And that changes. It literally, I mean, we could get into a whole conversation about, hormones and the vagus nerve and all that, but I'm sure you have other people talking about those things. So just this idea that when I change where I'm putting my attention, the nervous system responds with the appropriate chemical recalibration to allow me a sense of well-being, as opposed to that kind of fried feeling when I'm constantly in pain,
Yeah.
right? Because that's exhausting also.
So
And then when I let it go and start to allow the, you know, the serotonin and the blend of different hormones to come in, I actually can release and reduce the sensation of pain or the perception of pain, depending on how you want to look at it.
uh-huh. Yeah, and then spend more time in that place where you're feeling good. And things start to shift radically.
They do. They really do.
Uh-huh.
And I speak from experience because I came into this work because of chronic back pain.
Mhm.
And the back pain was the result of holding so much trauma and confusion from my life. So, you know, there was nothing wrong with me. I remember reading the diagnosis. I grabbed the chart when the chiropractor left the room, and it said I had lumbago. And I was like, lumbago? That sounds terrible. But it turns out it just meant back pain. There was nothing wrong with me. I was just in pain.
Right, right. And it's like would have been such a comfort to be able to label it on something.
Right. At least I could have had a herniated disc or something, you know?
Right. But instead it was unprocessed pain.
Unprocessed sorrow was what it
Sorrow.
really was.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So Lavinia, oh my goodness. We are coming to the end of our time. I feel like we could just talk all day.
We could, and maybe we should sometime.
And maybe we should. I love the work you're doing. I resonate deeply with the work you're doing. And I have learned so much just by talking to you. And it's also just affirmed what I also know to be true in how wise the body is if we learn how to listen.
That's right.
Yeah. So just a reminder to our viewers, don't hesitate. Open that link. Check it
Yeah.
out. Lavinia has tremendous experience, skills, and wisdom to offer to you. And if you are here today watching this for free, you are welcome and we're glad to have you. In 48 hours, this video will no longer be available to you. So if you want to be able to come back and listen to Lavinia again and glean her wisdom, you may want to purchase this so that you can have it in your library for forever. Lavinia, any parting words, final wisdom, something you want people to know, something that's vitally important for people to know before we hang up?
Got me on the spot. I can think of 1,000 vitally important things that I'd want to share. I guess I would like to finish with a quote of Moshe Feldenkrais. He once said, "Movement is life. Life is a process. Improve the process, and you improve the quality of life itself." And so those are words that I try to live by, and I'd like to invite you all to ponder the wisdom of that man's words.
Thank you, Lavinia.
And thank you, Marcy, for all the work you're doing in this world. I really appreciate it.